right, and we're live. And so before we go into this, obviously I want to just thank you for coming out here, spending the time to do this. I think it's important for politicians to be able to be willing to do long form discussion and just so people get to know you. I asked you, was a day or two ago, I said, hey, Pete, I want to ask a bunch of questions and I want to get your permission on kind of how we structure it or just your thoughts on the interview. I just wanted to be respectful of your time and how you're running your campaign. And your response was, you ask any questions you want. I don't care because I have nothing to hide from.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, what a breath of fresh air, because like you hear it all the time that all these people that are seeking political office, man, they like structure their own interviews and they're hiding from this and they're hiding from that. And they get a list of questions ahead of time. And it's like, all the rest of us in society are capable of sitting down and communicating. Why are these people, for some reason, like protected from that?
Yeah, they want to be this ruling class and become a specialist in hiding who I am because that's what they want. They want to conceal their identity or their past. And again, for me, it's I am who I am. Like it, don't like it. I don't really care.
Yeah, no, it's perfect, man. And so I thought what would be a cool way to kind of spend the morning together is give people kind of a history of who you are, what you're about, where you're from, so they get to know Pete a little bit. I think that's important for us to know who our elected officials are, and then kind of jump into what the position really entails and the duties and the responsibilities, things like that, because I'm sure a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with like what that position entails, what you have the power to affect, what you do not have the power to affect. And then after that, go into why you are the better choice of the two candidates. And then we'll hit some questions and that should probably take us through the interview.
Perfect.
Okay.
So let's see, I grew up in Northern California, little town called Auburn. It's right outside of Sacramento. So I always tell people that if you in the past 20 years have flown into Sacramento and driven up to Tahoe and either eaten it In-N-Out or peed, somewhere,
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle of that's my house. I mean, obviously I didn't live in In-N-Out, but that's my hometown. And Auburn is this really cool little town. Again, we're in the foothills. So you get like the breezes when it's 105, 110 in the valley, slightly cooler, but there's also whitewater rafting. There's a lot of hiking, mountain biking. So that's kind of what I grew up doing. I grew up also playing sports, a lot of baseball and football, or at least I watched the football from the sidelines.
Yeah.
I didn't hit that human growth hormone element of my life until I was out of high school. It's ironic. Like I said, I was on the football team and I kind of half-assed workouts and that sort of thing. And then literally the day season ends and that next semester, I'm like, oh, I don't have to go to the gym. And I'm like, no, I want to go to the gym. Right. And
Yeah.
so I start getting fit after, which was ironic. But anyway, so yeah, that's Pete from like age probably 8 till 16, 18 was really hoping to be a professional baseball player for the Oakland A's. I grew up in the Bash brother era with Mark McGuire and Jose Canseco. Ricky Henderson was on that team, Dennis Eckersley, and that long hair and the mustache. I mean, just that's what I did. I mean, if you found me, I was outside playing baseball, riding my bike, whatever. So, graduate from a small high school called Placer High. Well, it's a decent high school, 1,000 people, 1,500 people, Placer High School. And for those who don't know, I'm LDS or Mormon. And so the next step was about a year for junior college, kind of screw around. And this was when junior college, I paid more for books than I did for tuition. It was $12 a unit. I remember that. Like I paid like $150 for my classes, like $400 for books.
I remember doing the same thing when I went through college. I remember thinking like, you can literally get any book on planet Earth on Amazon for even an expensive book, $60 or whatever, but a college book, a textbook, $400.
Yep.
Money laundering scheme.
Yeah, it was money laundering, but it was also before the boom of, tuition increase. I mean, that same tuition now is probably tenfold or more.
Yeah.
Which is, that's kind of outside of the AG, and I don't really want to dovetail into that yet, but I mean, we are doing such a disservice to our youth of crippling them with debt for degrees that are largely worthless.
Yeah. No, the last 2 episodes I recorded were with guys inside of the trades. One was electrician, one was a carpenter, trying to motivate our youth to know that like the trades are good options, because like you said, a huge percentage, like I would say my generation graduating in 99, right around there, it started a 4-year degree started to become like the new high school diploma.
Yep.
Like if you didn't have that, you're not even getting looked at. And then you realize like, oh, you spend all this money and all this time and it's not really serving people in a professional capacity.
No, it's not. And again, I mean, obviously that's a whole separate
we could do 2 hours on that alone.
Right? But I mean, so I graduated in 1998. So, I'm born in 1980. And so again, like I was mentioning, I graduate high school, do my year at junior college. I go on my 2-year mission for my church, which sends me over to Italy.
Okay.
And that
doesn't suck.
No, it doesn't suck. Aside from trying to, knock doors and talk about, Mormonism or LDS faith to Catholics, right?
Did you have, when you do that, do you have say in where you go, or is
No.
it kind of like needs of the church?
It's needs of the church, and what you do, the process is you go to your local parish leader, we call them wards, so your congregational leader, fill out some paperwork, then the paperwork goes back to Salt Lake, and they look at what their needs are, and then they kind of bilk it out as to, there's a, dude's coming home this day, this guy's available, and match up the need. And so my brother went to Brazil. I had a buddy who went to Tacoma speaking Spanish. I guess he ended up in like Fife and a couple of other, not Tacoma proper, but, and then another guy that went to Rhode Island speaking Spanish. And it's like, what's the need of Spanish in Rhode Island? So my buddies and I all go on these missions, and I felt like I got the draw, right?
And you're what, you said 18 at the time?
19. I had just turned 19. So I'm there for 2 years. I lived on the island of Sardinia. I was right outside of Rome.
Wow.
Man, it was such a cool experience. And for me, that was really like eye-opening to me, because I was kind of pretty, I don't want to say shy, but I was fairly reserved for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I always joked that I was that kid that would like, it'd snow in my hometown, not a lot, but I'd wear shorts and a parka. Like, didn't matter, I'm here now and I'm in flip-flops, right? And that's just who I am. Like, I'm that guy that's going to just blend in with the crowd, especially throughout high school, not rock the boat, nothing like that. The good kid. My brother and sister, I'm the middle child. I've got an older sister and a younger brother. They kind of didn't like me because I was that good kid that was reliable. Not that they were bad or anything, but, it was just always like, Pete's going to pick up and do what mom and dad ask, and can't you like buck the system every once in a while? And that was like that straight arrow. So I go on my mission.
And then the wheels fell off and you became a wild animal?
Oh, yeah. All sorts of crazy. So, I go back, finish out my 2 years, do my 2 years, finish out junior college, and transfer to UC Davis. So University of California, Davis, right outside of Sacramento, because they had an Italian program. And my goal at that point was to do one of two things: either get a PhD in Italian and teach. And at one point I woke up and said, that's really not a real industry. There are probably like 6 jobs available a year.
Yeah.
And so there is that, or like become some international business guy. And so I get my degree, and like things are going great. I'm dating this girl, and then like this relationship falls apart. And I started to do a master's degree in San Francisco State for comparative literature, and I hated it. I mean, it just sucked. It was,
I don't even know what that entails.
It read and write.
Okay.
I mean, which is what I do anyway as a lawyer. But it was really like taking books and like theorizing, like, could somebody, like, I remember writing a paper about, and I can't even remember, it was a Shakespeare play, and there was an Italian author that had a very similar story that he had written like a couple hundred years before, and I theorized that there may have been like some influence there, and the teacher was like, where's your evidence? It's just like, it was a total BS degree, but I wanted to move from Italian back to English and go back to Italian for the PhD, because I thought, well, I get a comparative literature, I can at least teach like junior college level or low level collegiate classes with an English-based degree in some sort of English thing, and then work on my PhD in case there weren't any Italian jobs opening in the university system. And so So that was like the plan. And after a semester at San Francisco State, I was like, this sucks. This is just not, it's not fulfilling. It's not that college isn't work, but like it just was work. And it was not labor intensive. It sucked.
Yeah.
It was really draining. And so, after that, I'm trying to bounce around. I'm thinking of like, I looked into financial sales, took a bunch of the Series 7 and 63 exams for anyone that does financial work, and like passed one of them but didn't pass the other, and just kind of really trying to figure out, I've graduated college, what am I going to do?
So you're what, 23
I'm
at the time?
23, 24.
Okay.
And mind you, my dad is the undersheriff of Sacramento County, just about to retire, or just retires at this time. And he's like, hey man, you want to go into policing? Like, the name's going to carry you. And he obviously knew my character, right?
Yeah.
Said, but if you want, even if slots are light, we can get you in. And I was like, it's just, at that point in Sacramento, I was starting to see the violence against police. And I was like, this just doesn't really feel like me. I want to serve my community. So of course that service found itself at running an Abercrombie and Fitch. And so I'm 24 years
Isn't
old.
that normal though? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like these college kids think they're going to get out of college and just take some 6-figure job right out of the gates because they have this degree. It's like, no, get some real life experience. And like, we laugh about that, but you're running a store, and I guarantee, like, how much real life experience did you gain?
Oh, dude. It was a ton. I mean, first thing, the biggest thing I learned was who Dane Cook was. So, I had that, but, in addition to that, the most important thing, to your point, that I learned was I was managing, especially during busy season, we were one of the top volume, aside from San Francisco, we were one of the top volume stores throughout California. And we had 3 of them in our Sacramento region, which is like 1.2 people.
Okay.
And so I worked at one of the busiest stores. And so, I learned, how to manage people. I learned managing 18-year-old girls really sucks. And 18-year-old guys aren't even better. And so, there was a lot about the corporate world. And, I got to the point where we had some of the top brass so Abercrombie's based out of Ohio, come back from Ohio just to visit our stores and check in on my status, right? And so I kind of was this rising star in our local, Sacramento region, California area. And, it just didn't pan out. And I had a friend at church. He's probably, 10, 12 years older than me. He was an attorney, had a really successful commercial litigation firm. And he's like, man, so he actually has Italian heritage. And he's like, we kind of bond over this, and he's like, why don't you like check out my law firm and let's see if that's where you really fit, because you're not doing what you need to do in the retail space. And I'm like, come on, Ron, like hot girls and clothes, like what more can I ask
Which
for?
is cool at 25.
Yes, it was at 24 and single. Life was great. I mean, I could pull the all-nighters to fold clothes to impress the general managers or whatever. I also did know, everyone I've talked to in retail, like, it burns you. And I knew it wasn't a long-term sustainable career. So I started talking to my buddy Ron. And so I kind of start fluttering with this idea of law school, take the entrance exam, and did okay, but not great. And Ron actually had a friend that he went to law school with that was the dean of admissions for Brigham Young University's law school, which at the time was like a top 25, top 30. And being LDS, the discounts were so significant. And that's where my eye was set. But I ended up being like one question short of being able to get in there, even with Ron's recommendation.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. So I go to this kind of crappy law school. Let's just own it for what it is. It's actually closed down now. People have hammered me for this, right? Like, he went to a crappy law school. And
okay.
It's like, I still went to law school,
Yeah.
And it cost obviously a lot more, but I'm telling you, dude, and I've mentioned my faith. I am a man of faith. I believe that God pushed me in that direction, because everything that's happened in my life, doors have continually stacked on each other. The first one being, I met my wife, PJ, online, who you've met.
Yep.
You didn't meet her online. You met her in person.
Yeah.
You probably met her online too, but
I met her in Gordon Michael's kitchen.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's where you met her. I met her online, and it was this like LDS or Mormon website that was like half social media, half dating. And literally the distance of the concentric circle was 500 miles, and she was like 480 from Jacksonville.
Oh, okay.
And so, I mean, like, you can't tell me that's accidental. It's not coincidental. I mean, you certainly can, but I'm not going to buy that.
Yeah.
And so I meet her, start dating, end up getting married to her at the end of my 3rd year of law school, take the bar exam, and I fell in love with environmental law while I was studying it. And I did a couple of really cool studies abroad, one in the Cayman Islands, to talk about how environmental law, benefits to the Cayman Islands and other island cultures. I did some other cool work on protected areas in the Caribbean, writing international law with one of my professors, doing all these things throughout the course of that. And so then I did what's called a legal master's degree. It's a post JD specialized 1-year master's degree to specialize in environmental and energy law in Vermont Law School. And I went to Vermont because it was the top school in the nation. And there, I had a lot of other great experiences, working with people who are very well known in the environmental law space. And I thought my wife and I were going to stay there. I had what looked like an opportunity to stay. I even took the bar exam while I was up there, while I was in school, while I was working, and, succeeded there. And I foresaw my career going there. And because it was a state agency I was looking at working for, the funding got cut.
Oh, okay.
And so when the funding's cut, it's like, now what do we do? I'm licensed in Florida. I'm licensed in Vermont. What do we do? And we had this really tough crossroads of, she's from South Carolina. I'm from California. I'm not licensed in California, licensed in Florida and Vermont. And we end up both trying to figure out what we're doing. We're, we're people of faith. We're praying about it. We're going to leadership in our church. And one day we're sitting down talking with one of the guys, and it's like, hey man, we cannot figure out what to do, and school's going to end in like 2 weeks. I got to have a plan. Do you have any advice for us? And he didn't really have anything, but both of us walk out with the feeling like we have to move to DC, because DC has its own bar and you can just wave in as long as you have a license anywhere. Like when I waved into Washington, I had to have certain requirements. DC, it's straight up. If you're licensed anywhere else, barring,
then it's recognized there, huh? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it takes some time, but as long as you don't have bad history or anything, you don't, like with Washington, I had to have practiced like 3 of 5 years or 5 of 7 years. And there's a whole like thing that I had to show that my credentials fundamentally. With DC, it was just like a free waiver, although it wasn't free,
A paid waiver.
Exactly. And so we're thinking, okay, let's go to DC. We make this decision. And I literally at that point, she stays back in Vermont. She still has a job. And I go and like couch surf for a couple weeks and literally like walk holes in my shoes with my buddy Ron. Back to him. He's like, hey man, unfortunately things kind of blew up in his life with the divorce, and he ended up moving to Arizona. And I'm like, this isn't really for me. And so he's like, listen, man, just print out your resume. This was 2010. So the internet, like I found a job offer on Craigslist and applied for that and ended up getting that after literally walking holes in my shoes, looking for a job, just handing my resume out to different law firms throughout the DC metro.
And where was the one that picked you up from Craigslist?
It was in DC.
In DC, okay.
Yeah, I was in DC. So I happened to move there and then happened to find this job on Craigslist. And it just, again, for me, it's a moment of faith, right?
Yeah.
Like we felt inspired to move there, and that was the right thing. And I'll tell you this, it was a tough year in DC. But my wife's job, which was medical sales, they closed the Vermont territory right after she left, and they opened a remote position in the DC metro. I mean, it was like DC, Virginia, and Maryland. And so she traveled around all three. And, things really opened up for her to be successful, and she was very successful. And I get this job with this law firm. It was listed as a temporary job. I'm like, listen, I can't really do a temp job. Like, okay, we'll convert it to permanent. Well, mind you, after about 4 to 6 months, they decided they want it to be temporary.
It was temporary again?
Yeah, it was temporary.
Back to temporary?
Again. Yeah.
And was this inside of environmental law?
Yeah, it was. Okay. Like, it was this tiny water litigation boutique firm, 2 guys that worked for Environmental Protection Agency, left that and sued the EPA
Okay.
for violating our rights. Fundamentally, it was, you didn't make the rules properly. You failed to follow the process and procedure. We're going to sue you on this. And we actually had a case that under the Clean Water Act we brought on direct appeal. And what that means is your trial court's usually like the lowest level. Like if you think of your court system as 3-tiered, you got the Supreme Court, then you have the Court of Appeal, then you have your trial court. This case was so important that it jumped the trial court, and the trial court was the Court of Appeals, which meant one more appeal. We were in the U.S. Supreme Court. And, unfortunately, what made this job temporary is they missed a filing deadline on this case that I had helped draft. And, eventually they got back in front of the court and were successful, but there was like serious, let's just say there were issues with finances for a little while. And
Got it. Yep.
So last in, first out, they cut me. And then here I am 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, whatever it was into this process. Like, oh crap, now what do we do? And again, I looked for some jobs and found another temporary job doing they call it discovery review, which means anytime a big lawsuit happens, there are lawyers who look at documents. And this is anything from like, if you're a CEO of a company that we're investigating, I'll get your emails and I'm looking for certain keywords and key sentences to prove up the case, right? This had to do with marketing, ironically, medical equipment, which my wife was doing, a different company. I'll throw that out there. And marketing medical equipment on off-label and off-purpose uses. And so it was really interesting seeing that. I mean, some of the emails that we read were just wild. Anything from totally inappropriate jokes to pornography being sent.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah, I mean, this is back in the early 2000s, 2010.
The internet was kind of new.
It was new enough.
People didn't realize that it was a permanent record.
Exactly. And then, of course, there were also the smoking gun emails of like, it's for this use, but we can sell it for another use. And it's like, that's not legal.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that was really cool. It was fun. And again, that was teed up for like, they'd go in droves, right? Like we'd get email tranches and be super busy, work 60, 70 hours a week. And then they'd sometimes lay people off. And even though I was one of the last ones in, they actually kept me on and were looking at hiring me as a permanent employee. And, fast forward 6 months, my dad's at a church event and there's a guy who happens to be kind of like a resource for employment. Well, this guy was an environmental scientist, an environmental consultant in California back home. And he's like, you should meet my son. And so ironically, Brent, the other guy, the church services guy, was going out to Maryland 2 weeks from there to work on a project. And so I met a couple other guys and get hired on as this consultant / legal advisor for a consulting firm and spent like 4 or 5 years there. Went back into litigation space in Sacramento for another couple of years. I mean, we worked on some cool projects, like an acquisition of 12 port sites throughout North America, one of which I looked at and said, hey, your land use permit's going to expire. And it was in the port of Los Angeles, which, as you can imagine, is not the highest volume, one of the highest volume in the country. And they're like, well, you can fix that, right? I'm like, so I start digging into it. I'm like, according to what I'm seeing, the writing's on the wall that in 5 years, they're going to redevelop this. So you're talking about a quarter, even though there are 12 sites, a quarter of your revenue is gone. And one of the bosses didn't like that I was advising that was going to be a problem. He's like, oh, well, it's like, dude, you can't tell them to invest $2 billion and a quarter of it's going to be lost. I mean, yeah, there's a lawsuit that could be launched, but it's going to take another 5 years on top of the 5 years with an expired permit. Like, it's not ethical to just waive this and look past it. So I ended up looking at that and I'm like, this is a great gig, but I really wanted to get back into litigation. So I did some school work and insurance defense work, which, was going really well. I worked for some really cool partners, and the insurance defense opportunity, I worked for one of the best trial attorneys, and insurance defense is litigation heavy. Like all you do is litigate. You don't really, You settle when you have to, but you try to go to trial because when you're representing the insurance companies, obviously they've got the upper hand. You get in a car accident, I get in a car accident. We need cars, we need medical. They just need to protect their bottom line. And so I worked with one of the best trial lawyers who was my direct supervisor. He was actually known as kind of the parachute attorney. In other words, if you had an issue, he was based out of Sacramento. If you got an issue in Fresno that's going to trial, call Joe. If you're in Los Angeles County and you need a trial attorney, you call Joe. I mean, Joe was phenomenal, and he was known and recognized throughout this firm as being one of the best trial attorneys. And then adjacent to me was this guy, Frank, who hated trial work. And so he would do all the paper pleadings. And so I had the best of both worlds of learning from Joe of how to prepare a case for trial, and from Frank how to avoid a trial through the motion practice.
So you have that choice, and depending on what makes the most sense.
Exactly.
And then you have expert opinions on both sides of that fence.
There is. And, I mean, so the key thing for me when I look at a case through the lens of like Silent Majority Foundation, right? We've got to look at what evidence do we have, and how does this case get resolved favorably for the people, for my client, but also for the people of Washington, right? And because I was able to see both sides of the coin, Frank taught me tricks and tips of how to try to get the right paper in front of the court at an early stage to resolve the case on motions. I mean, they're called dispositive motions. They dispose of the case. I mean, for a guy like you, think of it as a tap out, right? You and I might be going teed up for 5 rounds or 3 rounds, and that's our trial, right? But at some point, at any point in a match, you or I could tap each other out. Now, I assure you it's not going to be me tapping you out.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's the same thing, right? I call these our tap out motions.
Okay, so that the fight finds a conclusion.
Then. It's resolved. And because you haven't put the facts or the law together or whatever the case is, I can push this paper and say, no, in fact, I've got a case right now that I'm fighting one of those motions where they're trying to kick our case out of the court. And I'm writing that when I've got time between campaign stops. And, what I'm saying in response to that motion is, you didn't even bring the right standard here. Why are we trying to kick this thing out? Right. And so there's that element. But then with Joe, he taught me how to build the evidence with witnesses, with testimony, and then looking at the record to bring those to trial to appeal to a jury or a judge. And so, I mean, even though I was there for just shy of a year, I learned these 2 roads that really get you to the same result. And it just depends on how you want to get there. And it also obviously is heavily dependent on what facts and what evidence you've got.
Yeah.
And, a lot of attorneys are like, oh, let's just go to trial, or, hey, let's get it dismissed early on. I mean, for me, that opportunity to learn from those 2 types of attorneys, I didn't really realize they existed. I just thought, I think TV portrays, if you're an attorney, you're going to court, and you're deposing witnesses and all the sexy pieces. But there's the Franks of the world that avoid that at all costs. And I mean, he was damn good at what he did. I mean, the way he wrote, the persuasiveness, and that's not to say that Joe couldn't write. Joe was great at that, but Frank really had made an art of the paper. Joe had made an art of the presentation.
Well, yeah, and I guess if you get proficient at both of those, now you have options.
Exactly. And then, it really depends on your client. It depends on your resources, your budget, all those things. And you may want to go to trial because you've got the resources behind you. And you want to make more of a showing of it. It really depends. And so learning from those 2 guys, I think, really set me up to be a more complete attorney. I tell my wife, I do wish I would have had another 2 or 3 years working under those guys, because I would have been even more settled and really primed for what I'm doing now with Silent Majority Foundation and looking at being the Attorney General. Nonetheless, the time that I got with them was really uplifting and really built my ability and my kind of quiver.
Yeah. And that was back in Sacramento?
That was the last job that I had before I moved up here. And I get a call. So anyone that knows insurance defense, it's all about billable hours. I mean, you're talking about billing down to 1/10 of an hour, 6 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And so I didn't like that kind of micromanagement. And also there was like a billable quota, and if you're billing 2,000 hours, you're really working 2,400 hours because not everything's billable. You got to take a bathroom break, you got to eat lunch, all that stuff. And one day, we were celebrating my wife's birthday, and we had, my oldest was like, I don't know, less than a year old, something like that at this time. And, I really wanted to get back into more of a family situation. And so I had 2 friends from law school, and back to the fact that I went to Florida Coastal in Jacksonville as opposed to Brigham Young for my JD degree. Like this is where not just meeting my wife, but meeting my friend Mark and Ben, who then call me, in 2000, whatever it was, 14, 15, saying, hey, we know you practice environmental law. We have an opening at the Hanford site working for the Department of Energy. You should really consider applying for this. We both have lived up here. We were both raising family. Well, Mark, not quite yet, but Ben had kids that are a little bit older than my kids. Like, this is a great family area. The work-life balance exists, and we know you've got a ton of student loans. There's a whole government forgiveness thing. And so I'm looking at it and I'm like, Department of Energy, what do I do? Regulate light bulbs? Or, I had no idea what it did. And the Hanford side, I had to Google it. And I figure out, I'm like, this is a pretty cool project. You're cleaning up nuclear waste from the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s, from anything from defense waste to production waste of power and power sources. So I looked at it, ended up getting the job, obviously. 2015, my wife's pregnant with number 2. We're almost number 1's, just shy of 2 years old. We move up here. And I mean, that is really that's just really where we took off. I mean, we decided to settle in Pasco out of the three Tri-Cities. Things were great on site. I decided to, at one point I was teaching at Washington State University. There's a Richland campus, hazardous waste management, so I got to get back into academia. I had that work-life balance, and then a seat on city council opens up. And I knew that the guy that was, he had been appointed for less than, I think, a year or less than 2 years. And there were some kind of tangential issues. And I'm like, okay, I think that seat's going to be kind of weakly defended. And so I ran for it. Mind you, I've been in the community like 2 years. And I'm like, I don't know how I do this. And still did it. I beat out some really solid community, kind of homegrown folks. And so
were people like, this guy just came up from California, and now he's on our city council.
I got that when I was running, especially like, you're not going to bring California to us, are you? And it's like,
well, hey, that's an understandable concern, right?
And it is. And I said consistently, that's why I'm here, because, I didn't leave my home. Mind you, at this time, most of my family's moved, right? My parents and my brother are now in Knoxville, Tennessee. My sister's now more in Central California. At this time, like, my parents were basically in my hometown. My brother was in Southern California finishing up a PhD, and my sister was still local. So me leaving Sacramento was me leaving my family.
Yeah.
And so I reassured people. I was like, listen, I'm not leaving my friends and family that I've grown up with just to bring the same crap that I'm trying to flee from.
Yeah.
And so I think there was some reassurance, but it still took people a while. I mean, I still get it today. Like, oh, I hear your backstory that you're from California. It's like, don't bring those crappy politics. Like, don't you see that red R next to my name?
Yeah.
Not bringing the crappy politics. I'm trying to save you from the crappy politicians.
Yeah.
And so, 2015, move up here. I like I said, I'm teaching WSU Tri-Cities and really ingrained in the community. My wife's teaching dance, and like, we decide that this is where we're going to be and really stick our roots. I mean, I tell people this, while I might not be a Washingtonian, 2 of my 3 kids are born in Richland.
Yeah.
Right. And my one kid has these kind of soft memories of Sacramento, but I'm like, dude, you were barely 2. Like, what you remember is probably visiting. And so, I mean, we've raised our kids here. This is where our family is. And so I get on city council, and for the past 7 years I've been there. I'm currently the mayor of Pasco. And
how did that transition from city council to mayor transpire?
So we have what's called a weak mayor, which means it's the mayor elected by council.
Okay.
And so So I didn't have to run independently for it. Ironically, it only happened this year. So my 2024 has been wild. January 1st, I declare my race for Attorney General. And I did that intentionally because I knew that the next night, January 2nd, was our first city council meeting. And I anticipated that I would be asked to run for mayor, or someone would have nominated me. And so I wanted to make it very clear that Pete Serrano is declared for Attorney General, and that I'm not backdooring or hiding some critical, issue, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that I'm going to travel across the state.
Like, we just made you mayor and you left us.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
Yep. And so, the next night I get...
Imagine that, the honorable thing to do. Put all your chips on the table,
Yeah, it's a shock, and like I said, same thing with the questions. I'm always going to err on the side of being open and transparent about what's going on. And so they elected me as mayor that night. And, they're obviously, like, I wish I could be there a little bit more. Sometimes the engagement isn't there as much, but I mean, I try to be back in Pasco as often as possible.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would guess that the town of Pasco that elected you as mayor, or the city council of Pasco, knows that you could actually better serve them as Attorney General over the whole state as opposed to that position as mayor. Would that be a correct assessment?
Yeah, I mean, aside from those who don't like me,
yeah.
Yeah. And shocker, there are a few of those.
Well, I'm sure you're having a lot more people that don't like you come out of the woodwork lately.
Oh, yeah.
At least, I had Semi Bird on a couple times, and man, he didn't have any enemies until he announced that he wanted to run for governor. And then, man,
yeah,
people came out of the woodwork after him, and even from the Republican side of the house too. So
yeah, no,
I'm sure this process is not all cupcakes and rainbows.
Yeah, there are no flowers. Every once in a while I stop to smell the roses because they are there. But no, it's been difficult. But yeah, I mean, people are very supportive. In fact, they've had several of the city council members tell me, like, we really, you'll be a big loss, but we'd rather have you there.
Yeah.
And that, to me, it's the same thing with Silent Majority Foundation, right? 3 years ago with, you did have Eric on. I don't know. Have you had Vince on?
No.
Okay. So, Eric and Vince and I start the foundation. Then Rob, my buddy in Pasco, comes in when we kind of change out our board about a year and a half back. So 3 years ago, when we decided to start Silent Majority Foundation, I had no idea what it would grow into.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are just getting introduced to it, we're a nonprofit, basically a public interest law firm. We do other stuff, other advocacy work. It's everything constitutional. And, kind of to circle this back into that conversation, I was looking at teasing out the idea of running for Attorney General. And when I knew I was going to declare, I asked my team in a staff meeting, all right, who's with me? Who's coming to Olympia? And the resounding answer I got was none of us. And I'm like, oh,
damn it, dude.
Like, what? Like, am I a shitty boss? Like, does everyone hate me? And it's like, no.
Uprooting your family is a big decision.
Well, and it wasn't just uprooting the family. It was you're going to take care of, like, this level of stuff. Silent Majority's Foundation has to exist to be down here, because you're never going to get down this far, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, you're going to advise the legislature. You're going to advise agencies. You're going to help cover us from the state's perspective. But what happens when the community or a county or even the state slips something through that you miss? We have to be here as an organization that's a backstop to protect the people. Because
I see. So if they all were on board with you,
then
that agency would essentially be dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they
or
wanted
that organization, I should say.
Yeah, and they wanted to make sure that the people of Washington always had the backstop of Silent Majority Foundation. And I was like, oh, now I get it. Like, we've really created something here where people are passionate about protecting rights.
Uh-huh.
And to me, that was a huge, huge win. Like, I could not ask for any bigger of a compliment than having the people that we intentionally hired to support the organization, that do a lot of the groundwork, that do a lot of litigation with me, say, we don't want to come with you to make sure that we exist.
Yeah.
And
which that's pretty powerful.
It is. It is,
Not to go off on too much of a tangent, but I don't think I've told you this, is my gym started having some issues with the county. And the city council, I've worked with them, and we've actually come to a good conclusion, and everything's good to go now. But for a while there, it was looking pretty dicey. And I'm friends with Andy Frisella, and he put me in touch with Mike Yoder.
Oh, yeah.
And him and I talked on the phone about it for a long time. And he's like, hey, just so you know, like, we're willing to have your back, and we're not just going to sit by the side and let you lose your business over this. But I have a guy in Washington that I would love to put you in touch with who would be excellent to sit down and talk with. And he's like, yeah, Pete Serrano. I was like, oh, small world, man.
Yeah, Mike and I are actually co-counsel on a case.
Okay.
We were. And Mike and I have kind of teased out doing more together. I mean, he's got, the cool thing with Mike is watching his story, recently married and that sort of thing, and watching him kind of blossom like outside of the legal space.
Uh-huh.
And so, yeah, I mean, he and I were actually talking last week about the case and about a couple of other cases. He was looking for local counsel on another case, and I was like, not here in Washington. And I was like, hey, you got to call this person. And he texted me back like within an hour, and he's like, okay, emergency filing's done, and thanks to Rachel for covering us. And like, if you wouldn't have put us in touch, I don't know what would have happened. And to your point, it's a small world. Sadly, it's a very small world of those of us who are fighting to stand for our rights.
But what I've seen, even on my own journey, is all the people that are willing to stand up and push back and draw hard lines, we're all being connected.
Yes.
And so on one hand, it was like when he recommended you, it was like, oh, that's a small world. But I'm also seeing more and more of this lately because we have to lean on each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a true community.
Yeah.
And I am extremely grateful for that because, I mean, it's good to know that the same people are standing together.
Yeah.
And obviously, it's the standard divided we fall, united we conquer. And it really does show the power of a small, connected and really well-developed group.
Yeah.
And I do wish, my hope is that like the next phase is we can all kind of grow together to really build that community. Because even with me being elected, hopefully in January as our next attorney general, back to the point of Silent Majority Foundation, groups like us still have to exist. Because while the attorney general is going to have this kind of expansive view, there's not everything's going to be roses, on day one. And quite frankly, even after 4-year term, there's still going to be fixes that'll need to be made.
What was the initial motivation for you to say, you know what, I think I could serve Washingtonians better as Attorney General as opposed to Mayor of Pasco?
Well, I mean, obviously, comparatively, I could have a further reach, right?
Yeah.
As Mayor of Pasco, it's really limited to my community, which is really where I want to have the strongest impact. I want to be able to make sure my kids have a future and an opportunity. And
was there some type of catalyst that made you say I need to do something bigger, or just looking at the overall landscape, you knew that's where you could best affect change?
No, honestly, I didn't want to do it. I mean, tell you the truth.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I always say if you're drawn, the people that are drawn to political positions, you have to kind of look at them a little sideways because it's not going to be fun.
Yeah,
and it's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to come with a lot of frustration. And the people that are probably best suited for leadership positions are people that understand leadership is a burden.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's not even the leadership. It's just, I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, so here's the genesis of that story. And, I may catch hell for telling the full story, but it is what it is. This time last year, I mean, it was slightly after because it was Thanksgiving. I'm back at my in-laws' place in upstate South Carolina. Again, my wife was raised there. My parents and my brother in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her brother's in Charlotte. So within 3 hours, aside from my sister, everyone's there. And we're talking. And this is the part of the story I usually don't tell. Is I was actually interviewing for a job out there.
Okay.
And people be like, "What the hell? You got Silent Majority Foundation. You got Washington." It's like, we were seriously in this fight or flight decision. And, for anyone that leaves Washington, while it's frustrating being someone that stayed to fight, I also don't begrudge them for going somewhere better for their family.
Of course.
And
it's a double-edged sword, right? Because on one hand, if starting a new life somewhere new serves your family better, how can you hate on people for that? But the other side of the coin is this monster that everyone's running from. If we don't fight back, it's going to chase you, and it's going to find you no matter where we go.
Well, and that's kind of like my tagline consistently, right? Is sure, let's all go to South Carolina and Tennessee, and then what happens 10 years, so much of the West Coast, it's moving into the Midwest, and it's approaching those borders, right?
Yes.
And so we literally have this kind of discussion of like looking at the job, and then I get a phone call from Jim Walsh, who's a state legislator out of Aberdeen, very conservative, but he's also the chair of the Republican Party for the state of Washington. And so I'm like, what's Jim calling me for? Maybe wish me happy Thanksgiving or like whatever, right?
He's like, I have a proposition for you.
And it really was like, come talk to my little friend, like, and so he's like, hey, look, there's a list and your name's on it, and it's like 3 or 4 people deep. And I'm like, well, keep my name off the list, Jim, if you want to stay my friend. And of course, fast forward, my wife and I talk about it. I looked at the list, and one person that I had really hoped would be the catalyst to run, it's a woman, so I think in Washington that plays a little better. But she settled into a different gig that really is helping King County and Snohomish County. So I think she's where she needs to be, right?
Yeah. And
so I start talking to my wife about this. I'm like, hey, what do we think? We start praying about it. And it's like, yeah, this might be the right opportunity. And then, like I said, I talked to my team at Silent Majority Foundation about like, well, if I do this, where are you? And I knew that they were not going to bail, and that we would still have the ability to cover the people of Washington from the foundation's perspective. Once those things aligned, it was kind of like a green light of like, okay.
Well, and if you're continuously looking around for the right person, eventually you probably have to look in the mirror, right?
Yep. And I mean, that was kind of like the genesis of Silent Majority Foundation. That was literally a mirror look experience for me. I was working out in my buddy's garage because this was like height of COVID, and gyms were of the devil, and you couldn't go.
Except this gym.
Yeah, right. but
yeah.
I know
what you're saying.
Unless you had some private place, that's where you were working out. And I'm literally complaining about attorneys not stepping up to the plate during COVID, and I'm looking in the mirror doing my vanity curls. Mind you, for the watchers and listeners, like 30 pounds ago, so they were vanity curls. And
well, for the record, I like my gym doesn't have mirrors, but I kind of like mirrors in gyms.
I don't.
A lot of gyms hate on that these days, but there's just something about it.
I like mirrors in gyms, like not commercial, like my buddy's garage, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the problem with mirrors in gyms is you may get the idiots that are just like hogging the space. As long as they're equally shared for all the boneheads, including me and you, then we're good.
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I have this experience where I'm complaining and I'm looking in the mirror, and in my head is this really strong voice. What are you doing? I mean, it was almost like that, like very forceful. What are you doing? And so that led me to on city council saying, hey, Pasco's not going to do any COVID closures. I try to take that to a floor vote. I get hammered. I get a second. So the motion, and then they like let me talk. And then they're like, okay, well, the next thing I said, wait. We've got a motion in a second. We got to close this out. And of course I lose on a 2-5 vote. And so I'm like, okay, so the government's not going to save us from government. And then, I have this experience, and then again, that's where I worked on the recall of Jay Inslee, and that's where I met Eric, and that's really what birthed this. And so similarly, when Jim Walsh calls me to run for Attorney General, I have to kind of look in the mirror and say, is there somebody better? And, I mean, again, I there was the one individual is like, she's willing to do it. I'm totally willing to step aside. I think she's got a resume that's more appealing. Again, being a woman in Washington, you have to play all the political cards out, right?
Yeah.
And I just thought that that's where it might work out. And when she decided that wasn't where she was going, it's like, all right, I think I'm the guy. And, here we are a year later. And I mean, I'll tell you this, we are making a difference with this campaign. And I tell you this, and it's more of anecdotal and observational. I'm not conducting polling. I'm not going to waste the money on calling random people. But when we talk to people who are being affected by the crappy policies in the state of Washington, they feel unsafe, they feel unheard, they feel forgotten. They're like a fresh face with a fresh message of freedom while offering solutions to be protective.
Yeah.
People are gravitating towards it. And so, I don't know what's going to happen on November 5th, what it's going to look like. But I can tell you this, I do believe this is absolutely a winnable race and a toss-up at this point, whereas I'm sure some of the professional polling would say otherwise. But people are hungry, and I've got the message, the experience and credentials to back the message.
That's awesome, man. Well, and the thing is, like, and I self-admittedly am in a little bit of an echo chamber because the company I keep just shares similar mindset, similar values. But I have seen more people disgruntled in Western Washington in the last couple of years than the rest of my life combined, with exactly like you were saying, with the crime, with the drugs, with the homelessness, with all the things that, I don't think that this should be a left or right issue. And they were for a long time, but I think a lot more people now are saying like, hey, our last administration or the last AG or the last governor, nothing's really changed. And people are hopeful that a new face or a new administration could offer some solutions. Because what we know is that if we just continue to go down the same path and continue to kick the can down the road, it's not serving Washingtonians. Every small business owner I know, including myself, is dealing with methamphetamine addicts breaking in, stealing stuff. It's happened to this gym a handful of times. And me being a former law enforcement officer, man, I put the whole case together myself. I wrote the whole probable cause statements. I identified who the guys were because we got cameras all over. I got a lot of cops that are friends. People know who these people are. And man, I basically put full package cases together and just passed it over. And everybody gets the same response every time. Well, we don't have the resources and we're not going to be able to make an arrest on this. Or some of the times they've said, hey, this is a really good probable cause statement. We'll issue a warrant for their arrest. And once they get arrested, we'll be in contact with you. Guess what? I've never been in contact with anyone regarding any of these cases. And it gets to a point where citizens and business owners are extremely frustrated. And it's like, at what point, do I have to become a vigilante to stop people from violating the law and victimizing me? And a lot of people are arriving like, dude, what are we going to do? So because of a lot of people are at that place, I think a fresh face and new perspectives are something that a lot of people are excited about.
Yeah, this teased me back to when I first started Silent Majority, right? And I remember expressly having those conversations where people in the middle of COVID were having those same type of concerns of really gearing up towards vigilante efforts. And I said, and I don't know why I said this, but I do remember this, and it was 2021. I said, give me 3 years. If we can't change the system or at least fight back and get some wins, and we know the system's beyond repair, do what you want. Don't ever call me. Don't ever let me know. But good news is I don't remember those people, but I definitely remember the conversation. They're like, yeah, we're going to, no, don't go to Olympia. Give me 3 years. And if through the foundation, I had no inclination that I'd be running for attorney general in that 3-year time period. I said, if I can't fix it in 3 years, or at least show you some sort of ray of sunshine through the clouds, you do you, I will walk away, and I'll have at least bought 3 years.
Yeah.
And I do think we've had some wins at Silent Majority Foundation. I do think, to your point, equally importantly, that aligns with 2024, where there is a true set of hope. I do think people are tired. They're fed up. I'm very concerned if the same old happens. Honestly, what I would see is more persecution that leads to prosecution of guys like you and I.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I see out of Bob Ferguson and Nick Brown, my opponent. They would, in my opinion, they would hyper focus on people like us to tramp us down, refuse any civil rights protections, and seek to silence us, and then be punitive about it, putting us in jail if they could.
100%, dude. Well, and I know I'm the crazy one, right? But I talk about this on the show all the time. At what point do citizens say, hey, if the system's not willing to protect me, my family, and my property, at what point do I have to protect me, my family, and my property? And I can tell you a lot of people are having those conversations because crime is running rampant. And, I say this on the show very often because it seems like the left perpetuates this criminal behavior and allowing people to live on the streets addicted to drugs almost from a place of compassion, right? Like, well, we're not going to put them in jail because they're addicted. And it's like, you guys have no real understanding of what those people are going through. Because as a patrol cop in Seattle for years, all those people are literally in a living hell.
Yep.
They are not like, oh yeah, I'm a drug addict and it's great. They're starving. They're freezing. They have run out of hope themselves. And enforcing some new rules and some new policies that help clean that up, that's not just going to help guys like me and you. It's literally going to help those people as well. And saying otherwise tells me that people are out of touch with the reality of the situation.
Well, I hearken it back to, you and I are dads, right? Like, we would do our children such disservice if all we did was love them to death, right?
Yes, that's right.
And we would literally eventually do what we're doing to our homeless population, which is love them to death.
Yep.
Now, I have a bleaker perspective than this compassion approach. I do think that people are profiting on this, and there is a, homeless industrial complex, and I don't think you were sidestepping the fact that exists.
No,
but
absolutely not. I mean, there's positions. I forget the exact title of the position, but there's people in Los Angeles making $200,000 a year as like the head of the oversight homeless committee or whatever the title is. And it's like, they don't want to work themselves out of a job. So they're just kicking the can down the road to be able to continuously make this money and support their career without ever bringing any solutions to the table.
Well, in addition to the people who are directly in the government, you have the people who own properties, who run nonprofits, and all of it goes to overhead, right? And, I guess I'll put in the plug that Silent Majority Foundation is different. And if you have a question about that, look at our website, look at the work we're doing. The distinction is when you're looking at especially some of the folks in the homeless space, they're not looking to solve the problem. It's unquestionable. I mean, we had an experience, and I guess being on the east side, maybe I was oblivious to the reality of the true homeless encampments. And I'm not talking about the pop-up tents here and there. I'm talking about the actual officially recognized by the city of Seattle.
Yeah, like the jungle. Yeah.
And so when we were talking to these people, even they're recognizing that they go down to City Hall. The leader of the group said, listen, we petition, we're not heard. And my buddy, Bill Kirk, that does Washington gun law, was with me, and he asked, do you think that people are intentionally stalling this out because there's a profit to be made? And the guy, this was really hard to hear. He pauses and he's like, I don't want to admit this because obviously he's homeless, but there's a part of me that really believes that it's being perpetuated to keep people employed, to put money in people's pockets. And of course, this is a gentleman who's suffering.
Yeah.
Right. He's literally living in a tent and, at least in a protected space. But, I think you had kind of teed up what we wanted to talk about. And one of the first things that I would like to do is dig into those organizations as Attorney General. And there's what's called the Consumer Protection Act. And you can issue these things called civil investigative demands. And it's just literally a piece of paper that says, I've got questions and you got 30 days to give me answers. Oh, no. And by the way, you're answering under penalty of perjury. Or if you kind of refuse this, I can sue you.
Okay.
And that suit has a monetary as well as, if it gets far enough, could have an actual criminal penalty.
I see.
And so
you're going to just simply follow the money of these agencies and figure out what's really going on.
Figure it out.
Okay.
Why
and
not?
That alone, you should have everybody's vote.
Well, yeah.
Go drive around Seattle and see what Seattle's become. And I grew up here.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in Snohomish. And I used to take the city bus downtown Seattle when I was 13, 14 with my skateboard and go to the waterfront and Pike Place. And my parents never had a concern. And there's no amount of money that you could give me to allow my 15-year-old daughter to go spend a day downtown Seattle by herself.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's a completely different place from when we were kids. And it's like the trajectory's been set. We see what has happened to our state in the last 20 years. Something has to change.
Yeah.
And I think more and more people are opening their eyes to that.
And I agree with that. But it's not just investigating the organizations. There's a thing called the City of Seattle that's a significant problem.
Yeah.
Which is an organization itself. So let's dig into them.
Yeah.
Where's their money going? What are they doing? What are they achieving? What are they buying with the taxpayer dollars? I mean, there's so much to be done. Retail theft, organized retail theft, $2.7 billion in lost goods in the state of Washington last year alone.
It's insane.
And
it's so insane that they don't want people to be willing to protect their own things too. And it's like, listen, if somebody comes into this gym and grabs one can of First Form Energy out of my fridge and says, I'm not paying for it, screw you, and walks out of here, we have a problem,
Yep.
right? But most business owners aren't willing to confront that problem because they know it's going to come with a legal headache too.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty sad place that we've kind of handcuffed our citizens in.
We have. And, you mentioned Pike's Place, down in Chinatown on 12th and Jackson. I mean, it is a mess. I mean, Pike's Place is bad, but those are like the zombie people.
Yeah.
12th and Jackson, it's active, which is terrifying, man.
Yeah.
It's the same type of people who are smoking the fentanyl, but they're not all of them. Most of them are upright. They're transacting, quote, business.
Yep.
Which is usually stolen goods or goods that they purchase from their EBT cards, then sell at a pennies on the dollar, so then they can go buy their goods.
Yep.
You've got the lookouts out there.
So that's literally taxpayers funding their addiction, which
Yes.
is just preposterous.
It is, and of course they can't get arrested for stealing, just a couple of
Because it's not $950 or whatever.
Yeah,
who came up with that idea?
Oh,
it's insanity.
Super intelligent legislature doesn't feel it in their pockets.
So if I went to their house and stole something that cost $945, they're okay with that? No big deal?
I think that's, I'm not going to advocate for it, but it's certainly a way. And I say this all the time until it impacts them directly.
Well, it was just like when all the Chaz Chop stuff and all the protests. Remember when they went to Jenny Durkin's house?
Yep.
And suddenly there was a different tune.
Yep.
I wonder why that is. But that just shows you the arrogance of these people because they literally think they're in an elitist class and then they look at us like peasants.
Yeah.
So why would they come and help us? We're peasants to them. And I say that because I know a lot of people feel that way. Our elected leaders consider themselves almost like a royalty class in today's society, and people are fed up with it.
Well, let's kind of put that in the really tight political context of Olympia, right? For the past 12 years with Bob Ferguson and Jay Inslee at the helm, the legislature's been able to treat us that way.
Mm-hmm.
Day one, January 1st or 5th or whatever day I'm sworn in, and I walk into session and say, here's the Constitution, abide by this or F you.
Yeah.
Do you
Very
think
simple.
that's not going to change people, and the Marco Eliases
Mm-hmm.
of the world aren't going to be like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
Look, I want them to feel like the day of reckoning's come. I want the attorneys that work for me to understand we are always going to promote the Constitution. And if we find actors, they can get outside counsel.
Yeah.
And, my opponent's hammering me, oh, it's going to cost money. His law firm, Pacifica Law Group, does a lot of work for the AG's office already.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, one of my debates, I flippantly said, don't worry, you'll stay employed, man.
Yeah.
But that's the reality is if the attorney general's not in there pushing back on the legislature or the agencies when they're trying to bring laws or rules that violate our rights, I may not succeed because they're independently elected. That's on them.
Yep.
But I've been very clear, they don't get a free pass. They don't get to get the top cover protection. And there will be advice given that's transparent and open that they're violating our rights.
Yeah. And we're in a really weird time when the Constitution itself is trying to be demonized by your opponents. You see all those articles coming out. It's like, is the Constitution really good for America? And it's like, oh, they're literally trying to like push the message out there that maybe we don't need our constitutional rights, or maybe some of our constitutional rights are actually bad for our society. And it's just part of their big propaganda machine.
Well, it's a relic of the past, you know, and it should be a living and breathing document is their argument, right?
Yep.
That it hasn't come up to speed, written by old white racist people. And it's like, that's BS. These people gave their lives and livelihoods because they were fleeing from a tyrannical society.
Right. Yep. And
if we walk away from that document, we are no better than any other country. You know, there's a great show. I think it was called Newsbreak. It was with Jeff Daniels, and it was like an HBO or Cinemax or whatever it was, Showtime. It was an awesome series. And it leads off with Jeff Daniels as a news anchor, and he's kind of floating around trying to figure out his place. And he's going to a college on a panel, and they ask a question of, why is America great? And, you know, the two other co-hosts were like, freedom. And, you know, he flippantly says like New York Yankees or New York Jets or something. And then the panelist says, no, I'm going to hold you to an answer. And he starts off with, it's not. And he talks about how America's been on the decline since like the 60s and 70s because we used to be the top for education. We used to, you know, one of the things he says is we used to be willing to explore space. We used to be willing to push the edges, but now we're afraid of anyone that thinks differently than us. And he has this really salient point, and then he stops and says, but we can get back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we are in society is America, to your point, as we walk further and further from the Constitution, we lost our way.
Yeah.
And I don't mean you and I don't mean the people I mean the politicians.
The government.
Because
the government has lost its way.
Yep. They're selling us that it's a bad deal.
Yeah.
And it's the only deal that keeps us special. It's not our resources. It's not our manufacturing. Shit, we ship all that stuff out.
Uh-huh.
You know, we're not producing. We're a consuming society. And when we don't have the shining star of the Constitution, and I'm talking about the U.S. and the Washington Constitution, and I will stand by this statement, the Washington Constitution is better for you and I than the U.S. Constitution. And that's not to denigrate the Founding Fathers. That is simply observation given that they had 100 years before this state was founded to figure out where can we protect the people better.
I see.
They did it. If you read it, you read the two constitutions side by side, it's even more granular in how you and I are protected as free people.
Wow.
And it really sets up the government to be that protective blanket through the Constitution when it's abiding by the Constitution, right?
Yeah,
Let's circle back to that point. And so, you know, when we walk away from that, we're nothing. We're just a group of people that are living together.
Yeah. Well, and we all know that the Constitution is literally in place to protect us from overreaching government.
Yep.
And it's funny when they start to talk about like trying to violate our First Amendment rights and like, oh, well, we need to limit free speech because you guys are spreading misinformation. Not a government function. Oh, we need to limit AR-15s because they got used in a school shooting. Not a government function, but they think that it is now. And they put I try to not use nasty words when I have political figures on, but they want to put their dick beaters in every single last aspect of our life and continuously make us a less capable people. And sooner or later, you have to see the writing on the wall. It's like, oh, they literally want us to basically be slaves to the system.
They want us to be subservient to them.
And now that we see that for what it is, we have two options. I say it all the time on the show. It's by the ballot or by the bullet, because we can either vote the right people in and change the trajectory, or sooner or later, we're going to have to fight back and take what's ours. And that's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. That's human beings. That's what human beings do. You subjugate us enough, sooner or later, people are going to say, we've had enough. And that's sad that that thought process is on American citizens' minds. But at some point, is there another option? Well, we'll find out. And I say it all the time. Like, I know I go on these crazy rants and whatnot. I would love nothing more than to vote the right people in, have new laws and policies legislated, and be able to continue to teach jiu-jitsu, make money, and have fun. That's what I want to do. But at the other side of that coin is, if you guys continue to do what we do or what they do, and you're now compromising my children's future, well, we're going to have to fight back at some point. And that's kind of it's a strange place to arrive as an American. And having I talk to people all the time, and a lot of people are in that headspace right now.
I agree, and it's increasing, and that's where, like, I started, 3 years ago, having those conversations of, don't ever call me if you've reached that point, because I don't want to know. It's terrifying.
It is.
It really is.
And the thing is, nobody really wants to have to enter that space. Nobody wants to. We want to live our lives and have fun and do what we're here to do. And but if they disallow that through all of these tyrannical policies, sooner or later, people are going to say they've had enough. And I always say, like, if America inevitably has to arrive there, I just hope it's before I'm 85 years old.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll just have to watch it all go down from my porch. But before we go into too many more specific policies or specific questions that people have, I think it would be important to just kind of dissect what the position of Attorney General really entails, your duties and responsibilities, and what you really have the power to affect change within. Because I know a lot of people think, like, oh, if this guy's president, everything's going to be fixed. And it's like, no, that's not really how the system works. So if you are elected November 5th and you are sworn in January, what does that position exactly entail?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of talk about the genesis of the position, what it's grown into, and where it's capped. When you look at the Constitution, it's very, very limited. It was an advisory role purely. That's what it was intended to be, advise the legislature. And then it's grown into, and it says, and whatsoever the legislature, determines. And so now it's an advisory and a defense mechanism for the legislature, because the Attorney General represents the state of Washington, fundamentally the corporate body of Washington State. Now, the legislature, the agencies, and other politicians have basically deemed that as their get-out-of-jail-free card, right? And I don't think that's what's intended. I assure you that as Attorney General, don't stand with them, we're going to have some lawsuits they're probably going to bring against me to find out from the court what it really means. Now, the Attorney General does advise, but he also can get engaged with local communities. There are 3 opportunities for that engagement. One is when, let's say, your prosecuting attorney says, I don't have resources for this. Can you come in and help? So at the request of the local agency. The other one is when the Attorney General sees that agency failing. So if your prosecuting attorney isn't doing his job, I can come in and here and kind of throw the weight around and say, here are a couple resources, prosecute these crimes. And then the third one, and this is where seeing who the next governor is when I'm elected will be really intriguing, is at the request or demand of the governor.
Okay.
So let's say Reichert's there. Of course, he and I, we may not always see eye to eye, but it's like,
you can have a harmonious relationship for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really don't even see any significant differences where we would both be like, no, dude, I'm not going to do that. But
Bob Ferguson will say, that's that guy that used to sue me all the time.
Exactly. And it could be a wild 4 years. I tell people, buckle up and pop the popcorn, because it's like daytime TV drama of no F you. I'm not doing that. So it's going to be really intriguing to see how that plays out.
Do you have any insight or opinions on the governor's race, where it's going?
I think it really depends on who you talk to.
Okay.
I've seen polls where they're super tight and polls where Reichert's down 11%. And I don't really buy into polls, because it's like,
well, the 2016 presidential election taught us that polling is just complete BS.
It is. But, look, I think Dave's got a good shot. I think my concern is there are some folks on our side of the coin that lean more conservative, whether they identify as Republicans or not is really indifferent.
Well, I'm one of those people.
Right.
I mean, I was in Semi Bird's corner, but at the end of the day, who can we put in there to avoid Bob Ferguson? It's a pretty clear answer.
Yeah, and my concern is I hear, and I think this is more of a loud echo chamber, folks saying they may, not vote and that sort of thing. For anyone
just to ensure 4 more years of Inslee. Come on, dude. Well,
and that's the problem is, Bob is Inslee with a brain and quite frankly, a dark streak. I don't think that guy really wants what's best for the people of Washington.
Well, I know he wants you to have the ability to defend yourself stripped from you. We all know that.
Yeah.
He will be
armed. Security members.
He'll be surrounded by a team of 16 armed men.
Sure.
Because I used to be one of those people that did security details for the judiciary or for VIPs. And it's like that in itself makes my blood boil. It's like, you want to sit here and tell me that an AR-15 is not a proficient weapon at defending life, liberty, your family, and your property. Well, then why do you have a 16-man team surrounding you with AR-15s? Yep. Oh, but because you're a gym owner or you're a plumber, am I not a prestigious enough person to have 16 AR-15s around me? No, you shouldn't even have one. And that's what they're telling us. Yep. And that's not me trying to manipulate the narrative. That's literally what they're telling us, that we don't need these weapon platforms while you and your families are defended day and night by those weapon platforms. It's ridiculous. And people see this for what it is.
It is. And that's the important part of you telling your story, right? Is because you have that lived experience to say, listen, here's the BS flag. Because, I might be in court defending your rights, but you have that experience where you're like, no, I actually showed up on detail. Like, that's what I got paid to do. And here's what I brought to work with me.
Well, and
right?
I would love to have one of them sit down in the studio, which they would never, that side of the house would never come do a long-term format with just hitting it blank like we're doing right now. Right. But I've always wanted to say that. It's like, why do you guys think, if it's such a terrible platform for security and protection, why are you surrounded by it? And be like, well, it's actually rhetorical because
we know why.
We know why. Yeah, because it works.
Yeah.
No,
how about you guys get bear spray and that's all you get, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And then all of a sudden we see what happens with President Trump.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
Some kid, fortunately not the best shot, and unfortunately it caused the death and injury of other people.
Man, that was such... That was a weird day for me because, man, the emotions of that literally made me like tear up. Like I felt it in my chest. And normally I don't allow exterior things that I don't have the ability to affect change in or actually have it be part of my real life affect me emotionally. But man, that was just such a sad story for how that whole thing played out.
Well, it was a sad story and a sad day for America.
That's right. That's what I mean. It felt heavy.
I thought we had moved those types of experiences into the history books, right?
Yep.
Kennedy, both Kennedys, and Reagan attempts, but I guess, that's not even a lifetime ago, right?
Well, and the saddest part about this is, and Chris Cuomo of all people was the one person to admit this, is that, man, you guys, Don Lemon, Nancy Pelosi, you can line them all up and take the sound clips of them saying, President Trump is the next Adolf Hitler. And if he gets elected, our democracy will fall. And dude, a vulnerable, gullible, 21-year-old radical liberal hears that in his brain. This is the honorable thing to do, right? So they literally created this scenario where now we have people actively going out there and trying to kill President Trump, and you guys are to blame.
Yep.
And they don't want to take any ownership over it. And I was surprised when Chris Cuomo came out and was like, hey, we need to be better, And it's, I also wonder, you got guys like him, you got Zuckerberg now saying like, hey, the decisions that I made were wrong and I was bullied by the administration. It's like, are these people really having a change of heart, or do they just see the writing on the wall that times are changing and they want to get aboard the right team? It's hard to say.
Well, I definitely think it's the latter of the two. I mean,
well, the hopefulness in me,
yes, I do believe, and when especially like Cuomo, he's had several things that he said that I think shows me that at a minimum his eyes are open, and he may be changing or headed towards a change. I'm not going to say, he's full baptized, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's at least heading in that direction. Zuckerberg is probably,
Just playing the game.
probably so. That's really what that felt like. It's like, dude, way too late.
Yeah, I know. That's right.
Way, way too late. If you really felt like the administration was tamping you down, you should have done something then to stand for the billions of people that are on that platform and their rights.
That's right.
He should have done it then. So maybe you and he should get on the mat and roll around, and you should show him. He's what, like a black belt or something like that?
He's a blue belt.
Blue
dude.
belt?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I'll mop the mats with him. Not even break a sweat.
That'd be great. I think I'd pay to see that. Well, when I'm attorney general and I got the VIP access.
Oh yeah, we'll arrange that.
Yeah, we'll arrange that. You'll be, be like, all right, Mark, come on up.
I love it, dude.
We're gonna depose you, and then Greg's gonna handle the real business.
What can voters expect from you, as opposed to like what can voters expect from you to move the needle in the right direction, as opposed to if your opponent were to get elected?
Yeah, I mean, just to speak to my opponent and what you were talking about, he's running on an anti-Trump narrative. I mean, it's the Muslim ban and blah blah blah, and I can't tell every single time we're in a room together if Donald Trump is elected. Like, that's usually one of the lead-in statements.
It's actually, it's almost sickening that every single level of every political race, the opponent has to just bring up Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Like you can't see Biden or Harris even give more than 2 sentences without trying to turn it against Donald Trump. And it's like, listen, love or hate Donald Trump, I don't really give a shit what his opinions are and what he brings to the table. I'm asking you what you're going to do. And what that tells people is you just have little substance.
Yeah. So running back to that, I've said this all along, regardless who's in the White House, I'll sue the shit out of them to make sure that Washington's protected.
Yeah.
I'm not here. To me, the attorney general should be a nonpartisan position because it's standing for the people of Washington, and what will I bring to the table? You look at the 3 years of what I've done with Silent Majority Foundation, the 45 lawsuits that we've filed, protecting, your rights, whether it's firearms rights, whether it's First Amendment, religious freedom, free to speech, freedom of association, looking at trying to make sure people have the right to counsel when they're, locked away or whatever the case is. That's what I'll bring to the table, is that constitutional analysis. I'm always going to lead with how does whatever I'm advising on or litigating circle back to the Constitution. If the answer is it's not covered by it or it violates it, the litigation will be don't do it.
Yeah.
That's who you're getting with me in the table. And I'm also willing to use the bully pulpit or the press, I'm sure they'll never be full puppets, but use the press as my opportunity to speak out. I'm willing to be continually blowing the whistle like, hey, these people are violating your rights. You need to do something about them because, we've talked about it briefly. There are limitations to what the attorney general can do. I mean, I can't just sue the legislature. People are like, sue the legislature for violating our rights. I can't do that as the attorney general. That's what the Silent Majority Foundations of the world exist for.
Yeah.
But I can at least advise them, and I can advise them openly so that I'm putting their heads out there and saying, hey, this is the type of crap. Like you look on Twitter, there's a guy named Michael Easton that I've talked with a little bit, and he's starting to blow the whistle and show the email correspondence with the attorney generals, with court commissioners, with legislators. Okay. Rather than having Michael do that, maybe I should be the guy to do it as the attorney general and say, this is the shit advice that's being given, and this is where it's emanating from. And so, just again, it's with the current administrative state and politics as they are, the legislature can always run back to mom, right? And that mom is Jay Inslee or Bob Ferguson, right? And they'll cover them. With me there, quite frankly, I want no friends, whether they're Republican or Democrat. I don't want friends. I mean, obviously I've got some who are friends and will stay friends, but I don't want people to look at me and say, Serrano's got us.
Yeah,
Look,
you're
do
following
the
the
thing.
law.
Yeah, you got the right thing.
Regardless if you have a D or an R next to your name.
Exactly. And I will support Democrat and Republican bills like the same, as long as they're constitutional.
Yeah.
I will support the agencies as they make rules, as long as they're within the ambit of the agency and they're not violating our rights.
Yeah.
Once they step outside of that world, they do not deserve protection because they're violating their oaths.
Yeah.
You know, the cool thing about the Attorney General's oath. So when I became an attorney here, my loan oath was to the U.S. Constitution as an attorney in Washington. That's what we swear our oath to. As the Attorney General, it is to the U.S. Constitution, the Washington Constitution, and upholding the laws of Washington. And those laws are subservient to those two constitutions. And the problem is, you know, we've got the mirror image, right?
Yeah.
So the laws are elevated above, with our current administrative state, the laws are elevated above the Constitution. Well, when I flip the inverse and say the Constitution leads and the laws need to fall under these, and when you exceed those parameters, you're not going to get the protection. That's that.
Yeah. You'll make a lot of enemies when that happens, and good.
Well, good news is I'll have 16 guys with AR-15s, and I'll be number 17.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, look, it is what it is.
Something that I talk to people about and I hear constantly is another thing that people are just really fed up about is how government intrusion is becoming more and more prevalent in every single aspect of our life. And I mean, an example for me is when I bought my new 4Runner, I wanted to give my old one to my boy, but he's not biologically my son, so he's a family friend, right?
Okay.
I wanted to give him my old 4Runner, which I did. It was paid for, like whatever, right? Well, when he went to license it, Blue Book value has to be paid so he can put a little sticker on the back of it, or the taxes on Blue Book value. So Washington State gets to have like $3,000 of our dollars because I'm giving my boy my car. And that may not sound like the end of the world, but those type of things are starting to happen around every single corner. There's actually a Instagram post that one of my buddies posted yesterday, and it said 125 years ago, you did not have to ask the government for permission to collect rainwater, go fishing, start a business, renovate your home or build a home, use a transportation vehicle, get married, go hunting, own a weapon, sell a product, protest, grow your own food on your property, set up a lemonade stand. And now they want their fingers in all of those things. Is your position something that you could affect change in that?
Yeah, at a minimum, especially from, you know, some of those like lemonade stands are probably local ordinances, you know, so to have that level of effect is going to be real difficult, you know, just to be clear about that, you know, that's not.
Well, and let me say this too, because I have a list of questions from Instagram followers. And if their questions are simply outside of the realm of things you can affect, then that is what it is, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that we couldn't come down on cities that are over-regulating, but I don't think that's going to be target number one. Again, we have this level of problem with our legislature as well as our agencies. Let's start there, right?
Yeah. But don't you feel like the legislators have now kind of been like, they just go have their closed door sessions and they enact all these laws and policies where they can really just do whatever they want to us. And it almost seems like every corner you turn around, there's a new little policy to where you have to pay this much money. A perfect example is this gym. In order to have my parking lot acknowledged from the county as being, and we've been open since 2011, and this is just happening this year. They're like, why did it take 13 years before you decided that my parking lot doesn't meet county regulations? They said, well, you need to have a fire engine come out here and drive around on it to make sure it can support the weight. And then you need to have a county assessment done of your parking lot that you have to pay out of pocket. Then you have to have a certain amount of shrubbery around the exterior of your parking lot because that's county policy. And when it's all said and done, we're looking at a $75,000 process to have a parking lot that has been functioning fine for 13 years be recognized by the county so we get to maintain our business licenses. And it's like, those kind of policies are pushing people to their wits' ends. Because it doesn't seem like you're not trying to do this to my parking lot to serve the community better. You're doing it because you get 70 grand out of it.
Yep.
That is clear as day. And those are the type of things that are making people go nuts. At least they're making me go nuts.
Yeah, no, I think land use is one of the most ripe issues. The problem is a lot of those. So there are two tracks of land use. Like as a city council member, we are told that we are expected to grow by a certain amount by the state government. So Pasco has grown from 60,000 to 80,000 in the 10 years I've been there. And the projection is over the next 10 to 12 years, another 40,000 will come in. And I've told people, I'm like, we need to look at where we're growing, where we're going to get the money to plan for that growth, the roads, the water, anything. You know, we're running out of water, even though there's a Columbia River. That's a whole separate issue, water rights. But, you know, when the state's telling us how we're supposed to grow, it's like, why am I elected in this body if Olympia is going to dictate what Pasco looks like, right?
So then Olympia tells cities what rate they're supposed to grow at, and then does that really incentivize like how they collect money to be able to implement that growth?
Well, it means we have to plan for that. That could be the collection of money, or it means, in my case, you know, I'll push back on that. And I've had our team, our growth, our planning department, they're like, well, we kind of just have to accept it. I'm like, we need to push back. Pasco doesn't necessarily want to be 125,000 people in 15 years. And
why is that any business of the state?
And it's the same question that you're asking. Why is your parking lot a problem? It goes back to revenue. It goes back to bad legislation that's been passed. And that's where, again, I think the Attorney General, I might not have the ability to fully affect that. But when it's like, hey, look, you're passing unfunded mandates, which are a violation of the Constitution. You are directly impacting by your housing requirements what the cities look like. Not all cities want to grow like Seattle. And Seattle's obviously at the point where they can only grow vertically, not horizontally. I mean, they're recognizing, I've heard several of the people on the campaign trail, because I do spend a lot of time in Seattle, a lot of folks that are talking about tree canopy cover, and it's like, oh, wait, you're trying to become more like Pasco and make Pasco more like Seattle? This is a problem for me. And so the Attorney General is going to have the opportunity to advise on those bills. Now, the problem is when they're passing 2,000-3,000 bills in a 90 or 120-day session, there's no way our agency is going to catch them all.
Well, and that's part of the scheme, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
You got 24 hours to read 2,000 pages and then vote on it.
Yep.
And it's like, everybody knows that's a scheme.
Yeah. Well, and you know, you have single line legislation that's supposed to occur, and you have a title that's single line, and then everything that flows under it is just crap. I mean, so there's a lot of opportunity for the Attorney General to get closer, or quite frankly, he's probably closely involved already, but pushing his agenda.
Yeah.
With me being more involved in the making the laws and having a team that advises on that, I think we're going to start seeing hopefully a slowdown on some of those laws. And again, the agency rules that impact you in my life, whether it's our pocketbook or our rights. And the opportunity to just really sit back and say, this doesn't serve the people of Washington. You know, if you're going to adopt it, go ahead. Good luck. Figure out how you're going to fight it.
Awesome, man. You ready to jump into some of these questions now? All right. So this is from, where's it at? My friend Rachel Novak. Do you know the Novaks by chance? They're friends with the Micos.
Okay. I think I know them. I don't know.
What has the current administration implemented or ignored that you plan on turning around?
Oh, geez. How much time do we have left? I mean, quite frankly, just the simple question is, or a simple answer is, they have ignored the Constitution, and that's what I'm going to lead with. I've talked about this with a lot of folks. I really want like a 9-person team that's advisory to me on the Constitution. And I want people that are left and believe, as we talked about, the Constitution shouldn't exist. And I want people that are hard right, that believes that the Constitution should never veer. And I want people in the middle. And I want them to come up and write opinions. This bill violates the Constitution, or the Constitution allows for this because X, Y, and Z. Here's the case law that supports my theory. I want that in my agency. That's going to be my first real pickup, is developing both sides. Because I don't, my opponent's like, oh, anything he thinks is anti-constitutional he's going to stamp down on. It's like, it's not how I view it. It's how the case law supports the decision, right?
Yeah, which is how law is supposed to work.
Exactly.
You're interpreting it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I want people from both sides and people in the middle to advise me on this so that we are getting a full, robust picture.
So what you're saying is you actually want to serve Washingtonians as a whole?
Yeah, I guess that's probably the real thumbnail sketch of that question.
And then her part 2 said, what could you implement, or what strategies could you implement to help increase election integrity?
Yeah, that's going to be tough. Really, it depends. Dale Whitaker running for Secretary of State, if he's elected, a lot can be done. If it's going to be me and Steve Hobbs, a lot of his authority is rulemaking. And as long as he's following the principles of rulemaking, it's going to be hard to say, hey, no, this doesn't happen. Now, the biggest thing is when you look at the 30-day residency requirement that got waived, the Attorney General had a heavy hand in that because they settled that out of court. So when I'm defending, I'm going to always look to what is right for the people of Washington. So if the Secretary of State, skirts me and makes rules within the legal process that I don't catch, that don't line up, as long as they're not violating our rights, it'd be tough for me to say no to that.
Yeah.
But when he asked me to settle a case out of court and screw the people and violate Constitution, be like, well, time out. Good luck. Defend it on your own. And by the way, I'll see you on the back end if you're going to do that.
I love that you always throw that in. That's always your ace in the hole.
It
right?
is.
Yeah.
Hey, look, not just not defending, but coming after you.
And so we may not be a border state. Well, we are with Canada, but that's not where everybody's concern is at. And she asked, with the border crisis happening, what is your opinion on deporting illegal criminals?
Yeah, I mean, so let's not forget, we are, to your point, not just Canada, but we got our seaports.
Yeah.
Right? You know, I mean, and I understand that that's not the high traffic that people are focused on, but we need to protect those borders. Mm-hmm. Let's start with that. Let's not ignore them and assume that everything's coming up from the south, which is where the majority is coming from, but we have to protect our borders. And so as far as deporting people who have a criminal history, absolutely, I have no issue there. Now, it gets dicey because that's more of a federal jurisdiction issue.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's going to depend on how that, how the presidential race shakes out.
Yeah, what administration's in place.
But
to
that's not to say that we can't at least blow the whistle of like, hey, they're criminals. And if they're committing crimes, there's no question that we can't enforce the law and really push prosecuting attorneys and use our office to enforce the law. So that's where we would start. And, if they're coming in and committing crimes and need to get deported, that's, push that over to the federal agencies.
Okay. Next question. I'm just going to read it. I don't expect an answer. Does he want to slap his opponent as bad as I do? All right. And the next question. Oh, I know who this is from. Can Pete defeat a triangle choke from Greg Anderson? We can find that out after we stop recording.
I'm sure I've got 3 seconds on the mat until I'm gone.
What is your plan to support parental rights? Where does he stand on kids being encouraged to undergo sex changes and hormone therapies? And where do you stand on protecting the life of unborn children?
Yeah. So, I mean, Initiative 2081, I think, is what the number it was. But remember, all those initiatives that came through, there were initially 6. Now there's the 7th. The first 3 that passed were the police pursuit, the Parents' Bill of Rights, and one other one. I can't remember. But the Parents' Bill of Rights, Silent Majority Foundation is actually defending it right now.
Okay. And could people go to your website and actually read all the details on that?
Yep.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I don't look at our website as often as I should.
Okay.
It should be on our website. If not, it's been on our, I'm getting a nod. It is on our website, which is, I'm good. I'm happy to hear that because that is a really seminal case for us.
Yeah.
We are standing, what we did was when we knew that Bob Ferguson was kind of hemming and hawing as to whether or not he'd defend that Parents' Bill of Rights, we did what's called a motion to intervene, which means on behalf of Let's Go Washington, Jim Walsh, Informed Choice of Washington, and One Washington, we brought in and said, hey, we have the right to defend this because we put resources into the passage of it. And so we're ironically co-defending with the state of Washington that initiative, but we wanted to be there as the watchdog and have a real say in the lawsuit. So we'll make sure that we protect that. We're going to protect, our children and, born and unborn.
Yeah. No, I mean, you spoke a lot about your faith in the first half of the show, so I'm sure your stance on unborn is pretty clear.
Yeah.
This is more of kind of the same, but I'll just throw it out there. What is your top priority to undo the crazy shit Bob Ferguson has done to this state, specifically handling the drug pandemic, police restrictions, and the restrictions on our gun rights? Because I know a lot of people feel like, it's not that we're going to lose our gun rights, is that it's been, they've slowly been chipping away at it, and we're already deep into it. You can only buy 10-round magazines now, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so, the good news is Silent Majority Foundation won the large capacity magazine case in Cowlitz County, the Gators guns case. That's us. And so right now that's on appeal. And I've said that there are opportunities either for me to recuse myself from that when elected, or maybe there are other ways to handle it. And so once elected, we're going to see where that case is. It's before the state Supreme Court. Sorry. I was going to say U.S. Supreme Court because that's where we want it to go. It's before the state Supreme Court, but they've not given a date for oral arguments. So it'll be really interesting to see when they schedule oral arguments on that case and where I am.
Okay.
There are a couple of paths, and I've been I'm holding some of those close to the chest because I think it's better served that we.
Yeah, you don't put your plan
I don't,
out there for everybody to scrutinize ahead of time.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
there's a handful of people asking about that. The next question is, what can he do? Meaning, what is within his power to restore our Second Amendment rights that are under attack here in Washington? Yeah. So,
and I'll continually be a staunch defender of your Second Amendment rights. Part of the issue is Bob sponsored those bills. 1240, the assault weapons ban, and the large capacity magazine 5078. I'm not sure if he did all the camera ones where FFLs are required to record, but those came at the sponsorship of Bob Ferguson.
Yeah.
So obviously, I'm going to be advising the legislature. If you want to say, I've been told by folks who testified in Olympia that the legislature is so brazen to say, you're claiming this violates your constitutional rights, go ahead and sue us. But again, it's because they've always had Bob Ferguson to run to. It'll be interesting when I'm there and it's like they say sue us, and I stand up and say, who's gonna defend you? Because I won't.
Yeah.
I mean, why would I defend something that's blatantly unconstitutional?
Can we sue them for having 30-round magazines in their security details guns?
I've always thought about that.
Because hey, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. 10-round magazines in your security detail.
Well, and why is it that you and I would be absolutely hammered, or again, Wally Wentz and Gators guns are risking significant fines for selling, and the state agencies, the police are exempt? And again, I'm not suggesting our police don't need these tools. They're great tools for them.
Yeah, but exactly. Why do they have special treatment?
Yeah, exactly.
That was never the position. That was never what government was supposed to be. It's of the people, by the people, for the people, not us and them.
Exactly.
And all these little things matter because it widens that gap between us and them, and people are feeling it.
It does. And that is my concern. And that's where, again, back to that conversation 3 years ago, it's like, people are feeling how disparate that the us and them notion is.
It's like, look at London. Hey, you want to strip us of our guns? Take them from the cops too.
Yep.
Like put us on an even playing field. But they don't want to do that. They want the government to hold absolute power while we hold none. And it's crazy, man.
Yeah.
All right, last question, then we can wrap it up, or you can, say what you would like to say and close on. But what are your thoughts on the justice system as a whole, and what could be done to further prevent fraudulent type charges of people? Like Andy Stump likes to ask sweeping questions. What would you do if you were king for a day in regards to the judicial system?
Oh man, fire everyone. Let's elect 9 Judge Dave Larsons. I mean, and I will pitch for him. He's a nonpartisan race. Dave is a guy who I do believe takes his current oath as a district court judge very seriously. And I think he'll take it as a Supreme Court justice even more seriously. So for anyone watching this, especially as ballots come out, because that's a nonpartisan position, it doesn't get the shine it deserves. Dave Larson is a good man, and he will stand for the Constitution, which means there will be like 1.5 to 2 justices that really focus on that issue.
Yeah.
So there's that concern, obviously.
Is the and pardon my ignorance, but is the Washington State Supreme Court, are those positions for life? Just like they're not.
It's a 4-year term.
It's a 4-year term.
It's either a 4 or a 6, and they rotate. So only 3 or 4 are elected at a time.
I see. Okay.
And then obviously, if someone dies or decides to retire mid session or whatever, mid term, then they're appointed by the governor.
Oh, I see.
And that's the rub.
So they're probably praying certain people die. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, the notion would be like, if Reichert's elected, he will have the opportunity to really, if people retire or just decide not to run, and this is what you see with Inslee, because he's appointed about 80+% of our bench.
Because he's been in for how long?
12 years.
Yeah.
So, people retire midterm, he appoints, that person has the power of incumbency. It's a nonpartisan race. And, that's a real leg up, right?
Nonpartisan in quotation marks.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, obviously Dave Reicher gets in, he'll have the opportunity to reset all agencies, remove all figureheads that have been appointed. He'll be able to reset some of the judges. And I think, with the advice that his attorney and I will be giving, I think we could really see Washington opening back up. That's what I would do if I were king for a day, is just really sit in on those panels and have more seats that are open where I can advise Dave, hey, this is where we need to go.
Yeah.
This is what is best for the people of Washington. I can't even remember what the original question was that you asked out of that. But that's my thought on the judiciary.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. He was just asking like what you think the problems are in our current judicial system.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, as far as the criminal side of that, it's, again, I'm going to harken back to a conversation I had with Larson. So he sits in district court, which is primarily family issues and low-level crimes. And he was telling me that when it comes to someone coming in for drug charges, they can't force treatment. So I think that's a piece that needs involuntary treatment, needs to be part of it. And then equally importantly, he said that someone could plea out and say, I'm going to take a bed, but because there's no way he's in federal way, the judge there to follow what's happening in, say, Pasco or Ellensburg or anywhere else, he doesn't know if that same person has a bed somewhere else because they've been picked up for drug charges.
Yeah.
So this same person could occupy, quote, 3 beds or 2 beds and be using 0 beds, and they're not going to get picked up and they're not going to get charged because of just possession. So our criminal system is broken because we've had such bad legislation for such a long time.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was wondering, and again, if this is just a preposterous idea, I apologize for my ignorance, but not that long ago, like my generation of soldier, there was a handful of guys in my unit, 2nd Ranger Battalion, that were there because the judge says you're going to jail or you're going to the Army, right? I feel like that same type of approach could be used with treatment, because all of these addicts, it would not be hard to get them on a car prowl charge. It's happening every single day. And then literally like, hey, we're going to give you 2 options. You go into a treatment center or you go into jail. So now we're kind of putting the ball in their court and saying, hey, do you want to seek becoming a healthy, better person? And the state's going to help you do that. Or if you're not interested in trying to become a better human, to jail you go, and that's your choice. Is that something that would even be feasible?
You would need the will of all. You'd have to have a lot of buy-in, right? I mean, and that's back to the homeless industrial complex. That's the biggest issue that I have is I think legally it's feasible. The question is whether or not it's politically feasible, right?
Yeah, okay.
It could be done under the right leadership. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And we're lacking that. And to me, that's the biggest delta that we have right now is we don't have leadership, period. And then if you want to call our elected officials that are there and call them leaders, they're just not going in the right direction. So I think involuntary treatment, again, we'd have to write that into the laws, whether or not you could get, a House or a Senate that's willing to pass it or both. That's going to be difficult. And so,
well, they heard it here first. If they don't do something, we will be moving to vigilante justice system.
There you go.
No comment from Pete Serrano on that.
Said from your lips.
Yeah, I know. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Kind of. Well, bro, we're coming up on 2 hours. I think we went over at least everything that I kind of had in mind to go over, but I'll just give the floor to you. Anything that you think that we didn't discuss that needs to be discussed, or just details on how to go out and vote, or whatever you think listeners need to hear.
Yeah, let's talk about the voting process, and then I'll kind of close down with some last thoughts.
Okay.
You know, the first thing is ballots are coming out probably they have to be in your hands by the 18th of October. So is this coming out tomorrow or
No. This is actually
live?
No, it's not live. This is on like a 10-day. This is dropping the 25th. So it'll be exactly 1 week after ballots are dropped.
So by the time you hear this, your ballot should be in your hand. And quite frankly, you should have already voted.
Okay.
I know the Republicans, at one cycle, it was flood them at the back end. You know, I would say flood them at the front end. You know, part of that is because I will be calling you, or someone like me will be calling and saying, hey, I noticed you are typically voting Republican. Why haven't you voted yet? Right. So save me the time. Let me chase the ballots that really aren't out there. So vote as early as you can. Put it in the ballot box or take it to your county auditors. Don't put it in the mail. I don't trust that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start there. Vote informed, you know, whether it's looking at my website and my opponents, whatever the case is, you know. So just get your ballot, fill it out, drop it in the ballot box as soon as possible. That way you can be done. And again, that way candidates and county parties and state party won't be calling you asking why you haven't voted.
Okay.
So that's the first thing.
And let me say one piece on that too, because statistically, a lot of people that would support you behind closed doors don't even go out and vote.
Yeah.
They're just not interested in partaking in that process. So if you have a candidate that you feel like you need to get behind, don't only go out and vote for him, but encourage your friends to go vote too.
And that's the big thing that I've asked people. Are like, you know, I mean, obviously money to get my message out is critical, but if my message is conveyed through your podcast to each person listening, and they convey that message to 10 friends, and those people even only convey it to 5 friends, I think that's going to be the universe we need to win the ballot, to win the election.
Yeah.
So it's as simple as, you know, if everybody seriously took it as a charge, I'm going to make sure my family votes and 10 of my close friends vote. That will swing the election. You know, I always tell people, you know, the universe I started with was the notion that I'd probably need 250,000 votes that I'm going to have to overcome. I think when you bake in the value of the initiatives, and, you know, I know people listening are probably pro-Trump people. I do think he's going to bring out a segment of people that otherwise wouldn't vote. And I think I'm going to clean up those segments of the center-right people that don't want to vote for him, right?
Yeah.
So I think that 250,000 of votes probably has really shrunk down to 50 to 100,000. And that's been my job. Go out and convert that middle ground voter to a place of reasonableness. And those are reasonable voters. They just have traditionally not voted our way, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm doing my job. And part of the job of everyone listening is to make sure that every ballot they touch or see gets counted. And that the way you do that, I'm not asking you to go down on election night and watch it, but get it in the box early, get it in, make sure that you, your family, your friends all vote. I got to have that support. And that's how we're going to overwhelm the system, that we will win.
Mm-hmm.
So,
man, I'm hopeful. I'm so hopeful.
I'm
always hopeful, and then a lot of times I'm let down.
Yeah.
But I'm like, dude, sooner or later, being hopeful is going to pay off.
Well, let me give you one quick anecdote, and it's not. There's what I see on social media, the way people have responded to me. I've literally gone and walked with people that are not traditionally Republican voters that are looking to me for answers. But the most telling story is, you know, I did an interview on King 5, and we sat down for a half an hour and we covered all sorts of issues. It got boiled down into about a 2.5 minute, a real probably, you know, short 1 page and a half write up that was pretty good for the most part, but it was like, he sued on COVID and not win a lot, which is not entirely true, but we don't need to rehash that. But the video, I think, shows me as a very common sense and reasonable person. So if that's what's getting played into King 5,
Yeah.
Think about that universe that's seeing me as opposed to like my opponent. He's going to make sure your guns are in your schools and killing your kids. And,
Yeah.
right. You know, I mean, so there's a universe that's getting touched with this. Holy shit, this guy's just a dad trying to make sure his kids have a future.
Yeah.
And that's exciting to me.
Well, I think it's exciting for everyone because like we're starving for real people and you're a real human being. You're not one of these lizard people that just seems like we're not even in touch with normal everyday citizens, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I live it. And that's, you know, kind of circling to like the closing pitch, if you will, is for me, the only reason I do what I do. I mean, I had a great job, you know, early in the pandemic. I was working for an organization called Energy Northwest. It's a state agency. I had my pension was getting built up. I was the guy that was selected to permit new nuclear technology. I'm talking small modular reactors that have been deployed in China, that have been deployed in Canada, other places in Europe. The first in the U.S. was going to come through me. There's a whole permitting process, and that started with the environmental component. And I was the guy leading the environmental side of the house. I left that because I knew the solution to giving my kids a future was me doing something different.
Yeah.
And that something different started with Silent Majority Foundation, which is why I've talked about our work a ton. I mean, obviously, we want the support there too. But it started with that. And then as I felt the opportunity for Attorney General, I've really come into owning the space. And I really do believe I've taken ownership of that role. When I look at the way that my opponent is campaigning versus how I'm campaigning, I'm out there talking to the people. And I said this, I talked to you about the homeless complex by UW. I told that gentleman, I said, I get elected, I'll be here in January. I might be wearing a jacket and snow boots, but I'll be here in January. I want to hear the problems, and I want to understand how I want you to trust me that I'll be back to help solve problems.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, okay, sure. You know, whatever. I promise this, get elected, I'll be back there in January.
Yeah.
I'll be back with the people that I've talked to in Chinatown who are losing businesses, where homeless people are starting fires and almost burning their buildings down. I don't want to be a politician. I want to be a problem solver. And that's where, you know, I talked about how I feel like God's opened these doors in ways that I haven't expected for my life. The tool in my tool belt is a law degree and a law license. And it's a tremendously powerful tool to stand for people. And I look forward, you know, I do get a fight for your rights, but as your attorney general, being the real backstop and that intersection between policy and legislation and the law, it excites me because I can breathe so much fresh air back into Washington. You know, guys like you and I are kind of working and walking around a little downtrodden, right? To your point, you get excited and then it gets pulled out.
Yeah.
And you get excited and it gets pulled out. Imagine what it'll be like having an attorney general who's looking to protect his children, his wife, and making sure that the Constitution is the leading edge of analysis.
Yeah. That's going to be congruent with all the other fathers out there that are real human beings, that are working 9 to 5, that are trying to put food on their table. Like all the people that are out there living real lives, that's the people that you're appealing to. And so, and listeners of this show, most of you guys are those people as well. And so do your duty and go out there and see to it that we get good people elected in office. And if you're a Washingtonian, Pete Serrano is our guy. But I know we have listeners across the whole country, but the same message applies. Do your research, find out who is going to actually fight for you, and then fight for those people.
Absolutely. I couldn't wrap it up any better. You know, it's been my privilege to do what I do. And for me, again, it's a real simple formula. I go home, obviously now a lot less than I used to, but when I'm off the road and those kids hug me and my wife's not too mad at me for being gone, those are the high moments. You know, I'm going to end with this little story. My son is 6. He's in kindergarten, and I'm the mayor of Pasco, and they were talking about what is a mayor, and he colored this awesome picture that says mayor, and then he actually wrote dad. But then I came in like 2 days later and talked to the class, and I get this folder that's got the picture stapled to it that says Mr. Mayor, and it's, teacher writes a much more substantive note of thank you for standing for our community and those sorts of things. And then all these kids now know me as mayor, and they've signed their names. And I take that responsibility very seriously.
Bro, it's giving me chills because it's important.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And to me, like, Attorney General of Washington just expands that mayoral footprint. Like,
yeah.
I want what I want is some guy to walk past me on the street and be like, you made my business succeed because you pulled this regulation or whatever, like, you made my street safer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's not about me getting thanks. That's the thanks in and of itself, of knowing that I've somehow made life better for Washingtonians. And what I call the once emerald city of Seattle, let's make it shine.
Yeah.
Let's make people want to come here. Instead of having Carnival crews saying, don't get off and go to Pike's Place Market,
yeah.
Let's have them say, you know what, dude, it's the streets. Maybe they're not shining, but they're back and they're not in chaos.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy. You're headed out to an event right now, and you squeezed in time to sit down with me. And that is not lost on me because I know, like, you're running around with your hair on fire right now. But I look forward to your success. I'm going to believe in it. I'm going to pray on it. And again, man, I've been let down too many times. This is the time that I think we're going to succeed, man. So I appreciate you. I'm in your corner. And maybe the next time we sit down, I'll be talking to the Attorney General of Washington.
Let's do it in November, so it'll be the Attorney General-elect, and we'll lay some things out.
All right, let's do it.